Good evening. Welcome to Politics Tonight. I'm WGN-TV political analyst Paul Lisnick. It's our nightly look at politics around our city, state, and nation. But tonight, we're going international. It was a big year for President Trump, meeting with both Russian President Vladimir Putin, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. At the same time, the president sparring with allies all over the world over a host of issues. The president pushing a tariff war with China, renegotiating an agreement on NAFTA, so much to talk about. But what great guests we have for you tonight. Joining me tonight in our WGN studios, St. Xavier Professor of Political Science and International Relations, Rob Shapiro, Bill Buck, Associate Professor of Political Science at North Central College. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me. I always appreciate that.
Good to be here. Paul.
We look back at the year 2018, and towards the end of the year, we get the president telling us we're pulling the troops out fully and completely from Syria because, maybe you knew this, ISIS has been defeated. You might have known it, the Pentagon didn't. How did this happen?
I think this caught everybody off guard. Just last week, the administration was talking about that we're going to have troops in Syria for quite a while. The ISIS threat is still there. It sounds like upper levels of the administration, including the Department of Defense, were arguing against this. So this was a bit of a surprise. It looks like this was a Trump decision, not necessarily an administrative decision.
And Rob, as you respond to it, but let's take it to the next step. It's a Trump decision, so is the Pentagon and everybody saying, well, now we've got to do it? Or can they say, no, Mr. President, can't do it?
He is the commander-in-chief. He gets to make the decision, but basically about the deployment of troops. I think the real question is why? What's really happening here? There's so much that's going on in the Middle East now in terms of geopolitics. And there probably is some explanation for this behind the scenes.
Well, some say, by the way, it opens the door for Russia and Iran to step in that region. You think he's thinking internationally that way?
It could be. It could be that there's something that concerns the Turks or the great rivalry now between the Turks and the Saudis. It's very hard to figure out exactly what this decision is about.
Bill, do you have the answer?
We could be overthinking, and this could be a domestic politics. He talked about getting troops out of the Middle East, and this is a way to do that. I think he wants to have a strong campaign platform, and I think this might just be domestic politics overriding the U.S. international strategic interest.
One of the things the president does domestically is tell us just how great we are revered and respected in the world now. Everybody loves the United States. He recently attended a G20 conference. He's gone to G7, all sorts of the G conferences. And I'm just sort of curious, as you watch these issues so closely as you do, and Rob, I'll start with you on this one, how is the United States looked at on the global stage?
Well, I think there's a lot of puzzlement about what the United States is and what its policies are. It's not, I think, a great look right now, but there are some successes the Trump administration has had. I mean, I was, for example, very surprised when China seemed to climb down with respect to the trade war during the conference in Buenos Aires. But there was striking things.
So Trump said. I don't know that we know that happened.
It's very, very hard to figure out. And of course, we have to see what will ultimately come of that. It may be that nothing will come of that. It may be that we'll just resume the trade war, or it may be that Trump will back down. We don't really know. The thing that's really striking to me is how little influence we have with other countries in helping them with their various problems. I mean, Europe has a number of really major problems. We used to be a significant player there because of NATO and because of our relationship with the EU, and now I think nobody is listening to us on those issues at all.
And Bill, as you respond to that, there's this headline that happened, I think it was earlier in the year, maybe a little further back than that, but where a newspaper, I think in Germany, came out and said the leader of the free world meets, and it was a picture of him and Angela Merkel. Mm-hmm. The leader of the free world meets with Trump. Mm-hmm. The reference was her being the leader of the free world. That was really impactful.
It changes the role of the United States in the world. Outside of a couple places, Saudi Arabia and Israel, the United States is not well respected. And it's important to note that makes our job harder. Diplomacy is not an easy job. And if you're looking to build bridges across the world and pursue your interests, not being well perceived is not going to help you get to where you want to be. Also, a lot of these world leaders don't want to be associated with Trump, right? Their public's against Trump, and it makes it more difficult for those leaders to work with the Trump administration.
Well, one way our voice is heard at the UN, of course, is through our ambassador, Nikki Haley, which arguably she didn't have a lot of experience to take her into that realm. She was the governor of a state and all that. Let's not debate her. But she's leaving, and in comes, you're going to pick somebody, go to a former Fox News anchor. That's who you probably want in that position, or at least that's who the president picks. Heather Nauert will be, assuming she has approved, the new UN ambassador. What's your reaction to that? Is that a message about the president wanting his own message to govern at the UN and maybe don't have people think too much for themselves?
Well, it's hard to know exactly what this message is, to put somebody in place who really doesn't have any experience to trade on or to
She is at the
use.
State Department.
It's true, but she was a spokesperson there, and she doesn't really have any political experience. Now, Nikki Haley did not have a lot of international experience, but she did have a kind of international outlook, partly because of her background, partly because of her interest. I think we got to give this person a chance, Heather Nauert, and see how she does. But it is a very surprising choice and not one that really builds a lot of confidence.
Bill? Diplomacy is a very difficult job, and the people that work at the UN, the people that work in the State Department do this for years and years and years. So this is, you're building relationships around the world. It's hard to pull somebody who has no experience doing that and suddenly say, you're leading U.S. foreign policy at the United Nations. It could be really troubling in terms of trying to get what the United States does. It's very surprising, and I don't think it's a very good strategic decision.
But do the members of the UN, when she speaks on behalf of the U.S., they can't tune her out, they have to listen and respect what she says, right?
They will do that, but they know that the message is coming from the president, right? So in some ways, the Trump administration has decreased the value and the importance of that role at the United Nations.
You mentioned Israel a little bit earlier. Let's turn to Israel. You know, it's funny, I was thinking the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem seemed like it was forever ago. It was this year, it was 2018, which we're looking at, back in May. Was it a good thing? And Jared Kushner not quite done with his Middle East peace deal?
Well, the movement of the embassy, I think I said at the time that we had to see what kind of a reaction there was over a longer period of time.
And here we are.
And here we are. And it's interesting, it hasn't caused as much difficulty as many people predicted. Of course, there was the immediate outcry from some of the countries in the Middle East. But you do not have this sustained criticism. And now several other Western countries are thinking about making the move as well, kind of acknowledging what the de facto circumstances are. But again, we have to kind of watch over the long term. There may be chits that are called in because people did not react. We don't know how the Saudis maybe have said, okay, we did that for you, now you're going to do something for us. And maybe that's part of what lies behind some of the other things.
Bill, some would say we can't have peace in the Middle East because of that move.
Well, in a normal political world, this would have been a big deal. But in the Trump administration, every 2 days is a news story, something to talk about. But absolutely, for the countries in the Middle East, this was a big deal. Saudi Arabia, Iran, all of those countries in the Middle East think about this a lot. And I think you're absolutely right. It's much more difficult to get peace done.
North Korea, we had a summit. Now North Korea lately has been saying we're the ones who are not cooperating with the agreement. Kim Jong-un never has worked on this before. What kind of future do we have with North Korea?
I think I will say the situation has improved, right? So we've come back from talking about Rocket Man and pushing buttons. We're still not in a place where North Korea appears committed to long-term removing of their nuclear weapons. Basically, we moved back to where the Obama administration was. That's great, but I don't think we should have hopes of eliminating nuclear weapons. North Korea, it's just not in their interest to do so.
Do things get worse, Rob?
With North Korea?
With North Korea?
Well, they could. I mean, it really depends. I mean, they're very unpredictable, except that you can predict that they're ultimately going to blame anything on us. That's the way it's always worked. And it might have been worth the shot to see whether it would move the ball, but it really looks as if things have just turned into a kind of slog. At least we're not on the verge of war, or there isn't the rhetoric about being on the verge of war, and that's a good thing. I think that's a positive development. I think it's very, very unpredictable, and one of the things that's unpredictable is when the Trump administration is distracted by other things. It'll be interesting to see what North Korea does, because that's the time that they usually do what they do, to see whether people are so distracted that they're not going to react.
In the Middle East, we have we'll call it the assassination of Khashoggi, the journalist, and the rest of the world. I mean, Trump defends him, and Trump defends Saudi Arabia. Even our Congress isn't happy about it. What's the impact on the world towards us with the way we handle that?
Trump really isn't on an island, right? The rest of the world is criticizing Saudi Arabia for this. The rest of the U.S. government is. Republicans in the Senate have come back and pushed on Trump. So he's isolating himself. To go back to an earlier topic, I'm not sure what Trump has or what the value in this position is. Long term, it doesn't help our relationship with Saudi Arabia because there really is, we talk about the balance of power, and Trump portrays it as if Saudi Arabia has all the leverage. The reality is the United States is much more powerful, has much greater leverage over Saudi Arabia, and if they wanted to exert and punish Saudi Arabia for this, we certainly could do so, and it wouldn't hurt U.S. interests in the long term.
Well, that seems to be what he says, Rob, sort of like to go after them will destroy a relationship that's an important ally.
Well, I think you have to look at the larger context in which this occurred. I mean, this was really a morally reprehensible act, no question about it. But Trump has been confronted with a big geopolitical problem because Turkey has been a very, very difficult partner, if that's what you even want to call it anymore. And Saudi Arabia is the country that we've kind of backed in order to fortify our policy against Iran. So he was left with this very odd and very difficult circumstance. I think he handled it poorly. And from a number of standpoints. But I understand what the problem is. He couldn't really go after Saudi Arabia for a few different reasons. But I think the way he chose to do it was really not in our interest.
All right. We haven't tackled the whole world yet. We're going to take a break. When we come back, Britain, so much going on. Britain still trying to leave the European Union while the growing popularity of nationalism spreads across the continent. Stay with us.